I'm Scott Allen Miller. This is my life living in Leon, Nicaragua. As a business consultant, something that I need to work with businesses on a lot is mental tricks that people do to themselves or that salesmen do to them that put them in a position where they're making bad decisions. And when you are moving to a new country or you're investing for the first time in a new country or a new place, this happens to a lot of people moving from city centers to the country as well, even within their own countries. We have a tendency to fall for the false comparison mental test that we do to try to figure out the value of a product. Now, this is not something that most people are familiar with, and even people who are familiar with will fall for it most of the time. So it's a really important psychological trick that you should be aware of. And as expats moving to new countries, we are especially likely to fall for this, both because we're in a position where we are most vulnerable to it, and we are emotionally generally looking for excuses to buy in a new country. And so this particular psychological trick is super dangerous for people in our position, and we're going to talk about what it is and how you can look for it right after the bump. So what is the false comparison test? Well, when you're looking at property, now this could go for anything, right? This applies to real estate. This applies to buying a soda at at McDonald's, right? So we're going to talk about these examples, and this is a well-documented psychological trick. And before I forget to mention it, Predictably Irrational is a book that I highly recommend for absolutely anyone. It just has so much what you need to know about yourself to be a functional adult and to protect yourself from yourself, right? So often we harm ourselves by acting irrationally, and we are irrational creatures, right? So understanding ourselves is this really key thing to just having a better life. And the book is very, very powerful and gives you a lot of insight into how we harm ourselves and how other people prey on our own illogical behavior to take advantage of us. So I recommend reading that, highly recommend. I don't have any link where I get paid for that, so just look it up. But when we're talking about real estate especially, right, we're used to the idea of comps, right? We talk about this in this market. If we're talking about soda, we don't really talk about that. But if you're buying a soda, you generally are familiar with, how much a can of soda may cost if you're to go to a vending machine, if you're going to go to Walmart, if you're going to go to a grocery store. And so if someone's going to sell you a soda at a fountain, you have something loosely to compare it on that you could go buy as an alternative, right? So that's a little bit more straightforward. And we don't think of it as a comp, but it is. And when we're talking about real estate, we have this idea of comps in North America, right? Okay, this house is very similar to this, and this house. These have sold recently for this price, and they're all very close. And so this one that we can't reasonably tell is much different than these should sell within this basic realm. If it's super nice, it could be a little bit more than these, maybe 5%. If it's really bad condition, it could be a little bit less. Most likely, it's going to be within this range, right? If it varies from that, we know alarm bells are going off. We're doing comps. What we also know is if I live in the middle of Manhattan, right, prices are, because I'm in Manhattan, right? So a nice apartment might be $5,000 or $10,000 a month. And if I'm going to move to the small village in Iowa, I always pick on Iowa, the costs are very low. And we know that $5,000 or $10,000 a month should get me the whole village and not a single house. The rental rates are not connected to New York City in any way. You would never attempt to use a comp from New York City to justify anything in Iowa when purchasing. If your question is, well, I don't need to go into an office, so I just want a lower cost of living, then you would look at your total cost of living, which would include rent or real estate purchase prices, and you'd say, wow, Iowa is much less expensive than New York City, so it's less expensive. But when you went to evaluate a house, you wouldn't say, okay, so all the houses on this block are $120,000, a reasonable number to purchase, right? We're talking about rents of $10,000 in Manhattan, because to purchase a tiny place would be millions. But we're in Iowa, and we're looking at a small starter home, and it might be $120,000. real numbers, right? And when we're looking at that house that should be 120,000, you're on a street with lots of other houses like that in your neighborhood in Iowa, and you look and all your neighbors have sold between 110 and 125,000, and so paying above 125,000 should set off some alarms. You may not be able to resell the house at that value, and if you get it below 110, well, either you're getting a steal or something's wrong with the house, right? Or it's significantly not as nice as the others on the street. You've got that to work with. You have this range, and it should be between 105 and 130. Like, that's kind of what you've got to work with. But what if you came in, looked at a house that everyone in Iowa would say is worth, well, we compare it, it's worth 120,000. All the people on your street, we would all pay about 120 for that. A few people would pay a little bit more, a few people would pay a little bit less, but the assessment is uniform. And you come in and go, well, I realize you guys would do that, but I'm used to paying $10,000 a month. I will pay $800,000 for this house. And when someone comes and evaluates that, obviously the people on your street would say they paid 7 times the value of that house for it. They're insane. A real estate agent would say they bought this at 7 times market value. It doesn't make any sense. A psychologist would have a jacket to put you in. If you said this to anyone, they would instantly say, that is completely and utterly insane. Why are you comparing two prices that have nothing to do with this, right? The value of this house is not related to the prices you paid in some other market. In New York City, all that money is going for easy access to shops and to the airport and to public transportation. You're paying for all these things of being in Manhattan. You were paying a premium to be in Manhattan. Now you're not paying a premium to be in Manhattan. Why are you comparing this property to a property that has nothing to compare on, right? Instantly, we'd all go, well, obviously that doesn't make any sense. It would be like looking at a can of soda and saying, well, I could be buying this bottle of imported champagne, and so since the champagne is $200 a bottle, that they've marked up this can to $8 at the grocery store is a good deal because it's not $200. Again, the straitjacket would be being brought out for you. Your friends would be like, I can't talk to you anymore, right? So it's so obvious when we do it in these circumstances. And those are really overt ones. And yet we see exactly this done on a regular basis in expats moving to a new country. They will do exactly that. So if moving from New York to Iowa, for those who aren't thinking about that, that's one country. And you're not even moving halfway across it. Iowa sits towards New York City compared to, say, Los Angeles. It's pretty close to the middle, but it's slightly closer to New York City than it is. So it's less than halfway through its own country. And to make a comparison between those places, even to make a comparison between Iowa and Chicago, would be insane. You don't even make a comparison of your local neighborhood versus the next city over, right? There's too many factors different. We know that you compare against houses that are within a few blocks of you and that are of very similar construction, and we know to look out for really major differences. Well, yes, this one's worth 120 and this one's worth 150. How could it be worth 150? Well, this one you see is inside a gated community on a golf course, right? That's worth extra. Maybe it's worth less. I'm not really sure, but it's different, right? So it has this factor that would make it justified to be a different price within reason. You say, okay, now I understand that, right? But when we're moving across between cities, we know you cannot compare. You don't know, the taxes are different, just everything, right? So we have this in our brains. But that's within one country. Now imagine moving to another country where even the underlying laws are different and the underlying availability and access to market and the processes for buying and how prices and features are represented are different. The amount that New York property has no way to influence your decision about Iowa is so extreme, and yet only a tiny fraction of how little the cost of real estate in New York City should influence your cost of buying your decision to buy in a third-party country. So Nicaragua, in my example, right? So not only are the differences bigger in most cases, right? You're not going to go from, a couple $1 million for an apartment to $120,000 for a house. You're going to go for millions to maybe $40,000 for a house, right? Another order of magnitude, almost, or half an order of magnitude, greater difference yet in underlying price for what you get. But how do you compare what you get? Because you're getting different weather, you're getting different laws, different jurisdiction, different visa zone, right? How do you put comparable numbers between zones on that? You do not. When you're comparing total cost of living, that is one thing. But when you're evaluating real estate, it is not. And it's important to understand that these kinds of things under the hood are business decisions. And people love to, at this point, shut down and say, whoa, no, I'm an emotional creature. I do not make business decisions. Everything in my life is a feeling. Right. That's great, but that's a way you've been taught that it's okay to say that because people are scamming you. Right. That everyone in your life is looking to, I mean, I'm not saying everyone, all these people who are trying to sell you things in your life, who are trying to convince you of things, who want to make a little bit of money off of you or manipulate you. This is a powerful tool telling you that it's okay to act irrationally, that, okay, well, you're going to buy a house. It's okay that you just act on emotion because it's got to be what makes you happy. These are things that we say as salespeople. And once people get that in their minds, I'm special, my emotions matter, and they do. But you need to stop and logically put a value on your emotions, or your emotions are working against you. This is how salespeople get you to pay way more than a property is worth to buy a car you have no need for, right? I go into a car dealership, I need a little tiny, I did this, right? I wanted to buy a little Chevy Spark, tiniest little thing, cheapest thing they sold. I was ready to pay cash, walk in, ready to buy it just like that. And they do my credit check and they're like, you could drive out in the Corvette right now, right? I'm like, yeah. I can drive out in the Corvette right now because I'm not going to, right? People who walk in and suddenly buy a Corvette are the people who can only do that once in their life because they walked in, they made a huge emotional decision. They didn't say, is this good value for me? They didn't stop and say, will this Corvette bring me the price differential of happiness in my life? And I'm not saying you shouldn't buy a Corvette. It could be a great decision, right? My business partner has owned Corvettes, right? If you buy them at a good value and you stop and think and say, this is something that's going to be good for me, you know how to sell them, you know it will work for what you need in your life and so forth, it can be a very good purchase. But for me, it was not going to be. And the attempt is not, this is a good decision for you. No, they don't try to do that at all. They say things like, you could afford this. Well, yeah, just because I can afford it doesn't make it a good decision. Just because I can pay too much for a house doesn't make it a good decision. All right. So that's a danger. People will immediately work on that. And if you make a bad decision, your brain will do this to yourself. So how does this play out in some more concrete examples? Well, a great one is an experiment that was done by Harvard Business School to actually show how powerful this is. And it plays out in a very specific approach called the 3-option sales tactic. I don't really know what the framing of that is, but it's the 3 items. So if you logically have 2 sizes, right? Why do we have 3 sizes of soda at every single fast food outlet, right? There must be a reason behind this, and there absolutely is. If you give people 2 options, they're typically going to evaluate them. It's just the way the brain works. You give them straightforward options. You have large and you have small, and you say, which one would you like? And people will say, well, I'm not going to drink more than the small. The large is too much. They do all these things, and they say, okay, let me look at the cost per ounce, or let me look at how much I'm going to drink, and they'll stop and think about it. But if you throw in a 3rd option, it's too much. People really struggle to evaluate when there's more than 2 options. With 2 options, it's just very straightforward. You have size, you have your thirst compared to that size, the amount that you like to drink, and you have the cost. And we can basically say, well, this one costs 30% more, right? But when you put in another size, most people stop evaluating. It's just too much. So here's the trick. Because there is this inability to quickly evaluate or desire to evaluate, the brain automatically says, well, small has the negative of being too small, large has the negative of being too expensive. We'll use happy medium, a completely misleading concept, and we will almost always go for that because large exists. So what we do is we don't take our small and large and create a medium. we take our small and large and rename large, medium, and add a large. Now, some people will just always buy the large, and that's fine. That's what we want to sell because that's our second highest margin. Notice that's important. That's our second highest margin. What we do is we price the medium so it's the most unreasonable. Go and look carefully at the prices of sodas or things like this, of French fry sizes at places that do this. It's the medium is always the worst value. And the reason for that is because humans never evaluate the medium, and they'll often make the large so large that it's like, well, I never eat that all, so I know not to get the large. But the small just seems so small. So the medium might be twice the price of the small, but only 10% larger, things like that. And so the margins on it are always the best. And they know that if they do this, even if you explain this to someone and explain how to evaluate this, and in many cases like the sodas, there's free refills, right? So small is the only one that makes any sense unless you're non-ambulatory, and then get someone else to get it for you. Come on, people. But so you have a Harvard Business School, and they did this in the book, right? So good. They had a class and they explained this. Okay, we're going to give you, in almost all cases, you're going to have a small option or a low-cost option. The size is not really applicable. You're going to have a low-cost option that is very lean on features and is almost always the right decision for you. We're going to have a secondary option that is a reasonable amount of stuff at an unreasonable price. You're going to pay too much for what you're getting. And often, an example that was used maybe in the book, but I've seen used other places, is you get digital copy of something, you get a print copy of something, or you get a digital and print copy of something, right? As like this ridiculous, like, oh, just in case you want to read either, we're going to make this super expensive so you get both. Now, a lot of people will be like, why didn't I get both for free? That's a good question. If you're going to do that, there should be two options, right? Just digital or print and digital. If you're paying for the print, just give them the digital, right? It's kind of obnoxious not to, in the case of this print media example of no one in particular. But they do this, they add this extra thing. So what they found was that if you gave just the straight example, people would almost always choose the digital one. It was so much cheaper, right? It was maybe 10% the cost. Well, it's so cheap, I'll go ahead and get that. I don't have to worry about the money. Business students who had been taught this psychological trick would happily make the right decision when presented with two choices. But the moment they added a false third choice, a third choice that mattered to no one, that had no real value but was way overpriced, suddenly people were paying for the other option most of the time. They didn't want to get the cheap one when there were three options. They stopped being able to evaluate. And what's important is, even when this was explained to them, the same day, the average graduate student at the Harvard Business School would fall for this trick. Even being told they were being tricked, they couldn't stop and think rationally about it. So their decision-making processes changed simply because a false extra comparison was added. That's how powerful this is. And if you think you are so much more mentally acute than a graduate student in the Harvard Business School, you probably have a pretty decent chance of that, because business school is not the place where the brightest people tend to go, and the fact that it's Harvard is just where people are spending a lot of money. So while that sounds incredibly impressive for some reason, if you're an actual business person, you probably just said, what would be impressive about being in the Harvard Business School? I hear you. But this is probably very average people with as far as mental acuity goes, right? But they are people who are putting a lot of effort into trying to learn about how to do business, and they fell for a business trick while the business trick was being explained. Their ability to self-evaluate was so insanely low, and their natural decision-making ability was so insanely low, that this is where you are. So yes, you may be, but this is a dangerous place to be, just imagining that you're smarter than everyone around you. That is how people convince you to do dangerous things. Oh, your evaluation of this situation is so good. Everyone else who has learned from trial and error, who has observed, who's, taking community knowledge and putting this together, you can ignore that because you're so smart that you'll evaluate differently, right? That is a way that salespeople get very good results, convincing people to ignore existing best practices and knowledge and such on things. And so that's one of the reasons that we see people we would expect to be at least reasonably intelligent making crazy decisions. There's all these tricks. People are very emotional, very easy to play if you know basic tactics, right? So you have to watch out for these things as someone on the buying side. So you don't want to be in a position where you're thinking, I'm so much smarter, I'm not going to fall for this. Way better is you say, I am totally like other humans. I am not an alien nor a robot. I am smarter than AI, but I'm not, smarter than the human race. And by acknowledging our own weaknesses, we can then say, I have to be on the lookout for this. I have to be guardrailing myself. I have to watch out when I'm offered comparisons that I stop and say, is the comparison a true one? And it's amazing working as a business consultant when I work in technology circles, especially, we see just endless amounts of this false comparison. Now, in the one case, we're using the third comparison to throw off the evaluation of valid choices. But in many cases, we simply give people one choice that makes sense. We don't want them to make that, or we don't want them to make a good choice about it, right? And so we throw in a false comparison. And often because people don't want to spend a lot of time doing decision making, it's boring. It kind of hurts our brain. We don't like it. We don't enjoy it. So people want to avoid it. Give them a chance to avoid it. They're out the door. They're like, good deal, right? So let's just say you're going to buy 2 computers, right? You've got one computer that's a reasonable choice, right? And it's very cheap. And then you have another computer that's essentially identical, but it's marked up significantly, right? So I'll give a real concrete example. You have a salesman who comes from a company that sells computers, and they're trying to advise you on what to buy, and they're worried you're going to go shop at Walmart or go on Amazon or just call around and get really good value. Maybe your computer is going to cost you $400. This is what businesses that know what they're doing pay for a lot of their computers, right? So $400 might be a really good deal. They want to sell you a computer that's essentially the same for $800 or $1,000. And trust me, this is what every computer sale in business is like, right? The things that companies actually buy are often 2 or 3 times what someone who works in IT would be willing to pay themselves for the same computer. So how do you get businesses to pay 100, 200% markups on something that should be a commodity for the most part? Well, you come in and you say, well, you come up with some amount of excuse. Well, it's from a better vendor. Well, it's got better support. Well, it's the one we recommend. And no one wants to know why you recommend a computer. People hate hearing about that. Half my audience is just tuned out because I'm using computers as an example, right? And there shouldn't, because there's nothing here to do with computers. It's purely pricing on commodity objects for a business. So they'll come in, and what they'll do, and people say, it's really easy to go to a business person and go, look, these are 2 essentially identical things. One's just really expensive and one's smart. How could you possibly make the business decision to buy the expensive one? How could it even be an option? And that's real. So if you had just those 2 things, nobody would go for the expensive one. But they don't have just those 2 options. The salesman will immediately come in and either provide their own more expensive item, or they'll find a competitor of theirs who has something that no one has ever purchased that's 10 times as much. Well, here's a $10,000, they won't go quite that far. Here's a $6,000 computer. And I see companies fall for this every day. The simplest, most straightforward, no way would you ever get this decision wrong, right? If you compare just 2 items, one has 100% better for you. This one has no reason to choose it. Give someone that third alternative, and this is the one they go for, right? That simple. Constantly. And they do it to themselves. They add the third. Well, and for some reason, it just takes all smart decision, all brain cells just leave their head and go on vacation. And they say, well, here's a $6,000 computer. So clearly this $1,000 computer is a deal, and people and businesses will come back. Businesses that are supposed to be doing an evaluation, their job, not just as an adult, but as a working person, their role is that they are paid to make these decisions well. They will simply shut down and go for the dumbest option. Well, I guess the dumbest option is the fake, really expensive one that may not even really exist. You just make up a website with some super expensive alternative to use as well, look, you could be paying this. Well, okay, but you're not paying that, right? These are the comparisons, 2 reasonable things that both do the same thing that are what you need. This thing isn't what you need, so why are you comparing it, right? It would be like if you're buying those houses in Iowa. Well, this one's $110,000, this one's $120,000. Why should I pay the extra $10,000? What's the difference? Where's the extra value? And the person goes, whoa, don't worry about why it's better than the cheaper one. Look at that place you looked at in Manhattan. This place is such a deal. You don't need to evaluate it based on market price. Just evaluate it compared to your saving money, so you're good to go. And people go, oh, cool. I'll just throw $10,000 away without thinking because I don't know why. But that's that sales tactic. Just throw this extra unrelated thing in there. So people will constantly overpay 2 or 3 times for a computer because people will just throw in these fake examples or semi-fake examples, irrelevant examples of something that doesn't apply to them, and convince them that, well, it's so much cheaper than that. You don't need to evaluate well within this space. And that's just incredibly foolish. And that's one of the reasons why smart companies maybe have $400 desktops and less smart ones have $1,200 desktops. Paying 200% extra for everyday commodities in your business makes it very hard to have competitive margins. Now, luckily, computers are not your main cost. Employment is, but the same thing would happen. Well, we could have employees that do this work at, $30 an hour. And we've been, we got people who are no different than those employees just asking for $60 an hour. But we also have people who want to be hired here asking the 30, the market rate. And you say, why would we pay double? And you say, whoa, who cares about paying double? There are people who would make millions of dollars a year in salary, and thank goodness you don't have to buy them. Or buy them. You don't have to hire them. So who cares about paying double? That's fine, right? And people go, oh yeah, let's just hire randomly expensive people. Believe it or not, you find completely incompetent people making double market rate on things all the time for exactly these reasons. So these are really crazy comparisons. So how do we take this and talk about real estate here in Nicaragua, for example, or anywhere where you are an expat, you're moving from one market to another? Where does this end up very often applying to us, and what makes us super susceptible as expats specifically? Now, as expats moving abroad and looking at housing or other things when we're doing so, but we're going to focus on housing as an example. We've done plenty of explaining how this works, so you can extrapolate this to many things in your life. But as expats, when we're moving, we are faced with so many things changing in our life that we're often emotionally looking for anchors, and we're that much more likely to misjudge things when we're looking. And something that we know that happens all the time. One is that there's this entire mechanism, right? We know of gringo pricing, where the people that were moving, that are from the place that we're moving to, raise the prices because they assume that we either can pay it or are unwilling to negotiate or unable to negotiate or don't know what the prices should be or whatever, right? So gringo pricing is real. And expats in the places that we're moving to often see other expats as easy pickings and a place to make a lot of money. So everybody has a tendency to look to new expats as a money-making opportunity. So you have a very difficult time getting realistic information about what things should cost. Just in general, real estate being one of the biggest problems. But it could apply to a papaya as well, right? This is a very general problem. So when you first come and you visit, you have a tendency to have this emotional reaction of everything's so cheap, which leads you to allow yourself to be gringo priced, or just puts you into a position of not having the knowledge necessary to combat it. So when you do that, and then all these people take advantage of you because of that, and it just exacerbates the problem, but you don't tend to notice it. So when you first are on vacation, you may be like, wow, everything's so cheap. It's half the cost of what I'm used to. Once you live in a place for a while, you might be like, oh, I didn't realize it's a quarter the price of what I used to. I've been paying double, and it slowly gets better over time. Not everybody has this happen, but it's a really common occurrence, and maybe not quite that dramatic. In some cases, more dramatic, right? But it's kind of in that range. That's a reasonable thing to say. Where this becomes really dangerous is not only that you may be misled and pay incorrect prices, sure, but it also means we may break our mental processes of evaluating prices. And so let's talk about this with houses, because this is a really dramatic one. But again, it might apply to a papaya as well. When you're looking at any business decision, you have to look at the value of the thing you're buying. So if we're going to buy a house, we need to know what its market value is. Now, it's fine as gringos moving to a new country. We're expats. Some of us are immigrants. Then we're going to look at a house, and it's okay if we pay 5 or even 10% above market, right? I'm not saying that you should. That's a different discussion. But it's okay that we're paying a little bit extra. We're helping to raise the profits in the country, and in small amounts, that works out okay. We don't want large amounts. That could lead to negative gentrification, right? And we've done videos where we've talked about that gentrification on its own is not a negative thing. We don't want to actually curtail gentrification, but we also don't want to be creating expat enclaves by accident by raising prices outside of market pressure, right? So we'll talk about that elsewhere. But it's okay to pay a little bit extra. We don't have to come in and haggle and strong arm and be like, I know I can get the best possible price. If you want to, okay, but that you don't have to. But if we are evaluating in any market, we want to purchase property around its actual market value or less, which means we have a chance of being able to resell it and make money, or at least get our money back. And remember, the price has to go up or you're going to lose a little bit based on taxes and the cost of transaction and so forth. So there's a need to understand market value, or what you end up doing is, I bought a house for $100,000. Okay. Oh, you know what? I decided I needed to move, or it was my nest egg. And then you turn around and you go to sell it and you find out it's only worth $50,000. You've lost $50,000 just like that, right? You've thrown it away because you didn't buy anything with it. And it's amazing how often I talk to expats who are like, I don't care about throwing money away. Obviously, that's insane. But so many people are in such a strong emotional state when they're buying abroad that if you were in America and you said you might pay 100% markup because you're not thinking about what the market price, you're not looking at the comps, you're not asking anybody, you're not checking Zillow. And if someone said, oh, I don't mind paying double for my houses, I don't care how rich you are, you don't pay double for your houses, right? That sounds crazy. Imagine saying that. Now, if you're like, well, I'm in a competitive market, I'm worried about not getting it, everyone's paying double, well, then that's not really paying double. That's just weird listing versus paying prices. But if you're paying double the market rate, the double what all the neighbors would pay, then double what someone else would pay, right? Then that's crazy. You're not getting value, and you can't resell it because there's no new value. It's still only worth the original value. So in that situation, that sounds absolutely crazy. What makes that make sense when you go somewhere else? Just because the prices are lower doesn't mean you want to throw away 100% of or 50% more of the money because you feel that money no longer matters. Like, that's a really crazy thing. But people really do get into this emotional state and start saying things like this. So this tells us that we're often, or at least sometimes, dealing with people who have, I mean, let's be honest, lost their minds when it comes to buying. Some combination of emotionally wanting to be on the beach, the excitement of being in a new country, the lower prices so that you could make mistakes. It's kind of like if I go into a candy shop, I might lose my mind. There's sugar everywhere, and let's face it, it's really cheap, right? So when I'm shopping for a new computer, I'm very careful to be like, well, I don't know if I should pay $200 more for this model versus this other model. Am I really going to notice $200 worth of difference? But if I go into a candy store and someone's like, look at all this candy, it's 5 cents, and it turns out it's only 2 cents, I might still buy a bunch of it and not evaluate that I'm getting ripped off on the candy, even though I might buy hundreds of dollars worth of it. Probably not, but I might, right? So because things are cheap, because we can afford to make mistakes, we're more likely to. And so when it comes to real estate in other countries, this can be a risk, and we can end up in this situation where the combination of the emotional state and the possibility of overspending so dramatically can actually cause us or allow us to break in our brains the connection where we see it as a real estate investment and we need to maintain this financial oversight of our own decision making. And everyone around us wants us to have this break. Everybody wants to encourage you to overpay. There's nobody you will ever talk to who benefits from you underpaying or getting market value, right? You alone and your family benefit from that. So you can't look to, my real estate agent. Nope, they're not on your side. Well, the seller's real estate agent. Nope, they're not on your side. The seller. No, they're not on your side. The other expats in the community. Heck no, all of them are hoping that you're going to raise the property value so they start recuperating from their own mistakes, right? There's nobody who is financially incentivized to be on your side, but everyone is financially incentivized to be working against you. Everybody. All right, so this is important to understand. So if you have that break and you lose that chain of logic, you're the one that's going to have a disaster. So it's super easy. How do you do this? Now, it's hard to actually do evaluations, but it's easy to understand. You look at what the prices of other houses are. You talk to people, find out what they've sold for. You get a feel over time. This is why you can't rush into things. And you build up an idea of what market value is. You may be wrong, but at least the idea is correct, that you want to determine market value. If I was to buy this house for X amount, could I sell it for roughly the same amount? If yes, that's market value. If no, then it's not the market value. And yeah, in a market like Nicaragua with very low liquidity, that can be so hard to determine. I totally understand. But that has to be your goal, right? If you say, I got a good value on a property, the only ways you can evaluate that in any reasonable way is either to gather comps over time and determine that what you paid was at or below market, or that you managed to sell it quickly at a reasonable profit or significant profit, right? And even that, you may still be dealing with someone else who did the exact thing we're talking about, and you didn't actually get a good value on the property, you just got lucky. So even in that case, you really need to do an evaluation to see, was this a fluke or did you actually get a good deal, right? This is for your own learning or to be able to say the things that we want to say, but it's an important aspect of it, right? So there's so many times that people say, oh, I got a great deal on this property, when if you investigate, did you actually get a good deal on the property? It's not that the answer is no. The answer is generally that they don't know. Right. So did you really determine that this was market and that what you paid was at or below market? No, I didn't actually determine that. It just seemed like a good deal. Okay, it may have been, but we don't know it is. You shouldn't repeat that it's a good deal. You may say, I got a good enough deal that I was willing to take it, but the fact that you took it already tells us that, right? No one twisted your arm. So obviously you thought it was a good enough deal at the time. The question is, was it actually a financially sound decision? Can you turn around and sell it at a profit right now reliably and have made a profit for all the time you've held it? And generally the answer is going to be no. What we find as this common thing that people do is, since this is hard and since they don't want to know this answer, and since they're in an emotional state where they want to justify the purchase at basically any price, what they do is say, well, just like the example I gave earlier, I'm moving to Iowa. I want this house. I don't want to have to, a leaf hit me in the face. I don't want to have to actually think about comps, or I don't want to turn it down if it's too expensive. So I'm not going to compare it against other houses on the street. I'm going to compare it against my house in New York City, in Manhattan, which was millions of dollars. So this is so cheap that I can just say everything's so cheap it doesn't matter, which is never the case. No house is so cheap the price doesn't matter. I don't care if you're a billionaire. Billionaires stay billionaires by not having this kind of mental breakdown, right? Billionaires do not go, you know what, I'll just pay double for everything. They might do that for a hamburger when they want it faster than you, but that's different. They're paying for the speed. They're not paying double for hamburgers, right? It's a different mindset. So what people do is they'll say, well, I used to have this $500,000 house in the US. Now I'm moving to Nicaragua. Now my house is only $200,000. That's $300,000 cheaper. That makes it a good deal. That is not in any way a true comparison. That is flat out lying. Now, yeah, it's mostly lying to yourself. I'm not saying you're trying to deceive people per se. You are, but in a not trying to harm them kind of way. You're just trying to make it sound like you made a good decision when you know you didn't. By meaning your brain is going to this place because it knows it didn't make a rational decision. It knows it didn't do a financial calculation. It knows it didn't figure out comps or market value. And so now that you bought a place, or you are thinking about buying a place, and you need to justify it, this feels like a reasonable thing to say, but of course it's not. To an outside observer, it sounds absolutely whack-a-mole, right? To say, well, this place that isn't here, I have a house that isn't like this house, and that was expensive. So the fact that this isn't as expensive as that makes it a good deal. That makes no sense. If that was logical, then you could also say, well, when I was in Italy, I owned a Ferrari and it was beautiful, and I lived in this mansion and I worked making all this money. And now I live here, and I was wondering if I should pay $2 for this sandwich or $100 for the sandwich. And I say, well, you used to pay $100,000 for your car in Italy, so that makes this $10 sandwich a good, or this $100 sandwich, a good deal here. And you go, oh, that is a lot less than $100,000. But you're forgetting that one is a Ferrari in Europe and one is a sandwich in Nicaragua. Right? Why are you comparing those prices? Those are not comparable things. And your house in the United States, one, is not in the same location. It is not in the same jurisdiction. It is not the same market value. It is not the same size. It is not the same style. It is not the same construction mechanisms. None of those things. You cannot compare, and utterly incomparable. Other than the fact that both things keep the rain off of you, presumably, you can't compare them in price. I mean, imagine all the examples we can give. This is such an easy example. Such an easy problem to give weird examples of, right? Well, my neighbor has a mansion and he pays $1 million. So the fact that I have a small 2-bedroom bungalow in the same neighborhood, I'm not paying $1 million, so I must be getting a good deal. He has 20 bedrooms and staff and 8-car garages. You have 2 bedrooms and you're sharing a bath. Why are you using the price he pays to determine if you're getting a good deal? That doesn't make any sense, right? All these things, you have to stop and say, wow, what would ever drive me to try to use this kind of comparison to do an example? And that is That is, we have to stop and say, wow, this is my brain short-circuiting, right? And lots of people, tons of people do this. So it's something to watch out for, to watch. We can guard on our own, but watch for people saying this. Watch when someone is like, so how do you know you got a good deal in this house? And they start comparing to uncomparable things. They start talking about the prices in Costa Rica. They start talking about prices in the US, talking about prices in Canada, talking about big city things. Are you in a big city? No. Are you on a resort destination? No. Are you in a, expensive piece of property? No. Are you, well, why are any of those things matter? The question can only ever be, what is the market value around you? And what market value is around you is based on what people can and do buy and sell properties for, with some small accommodation for over time. Things do change a little bit. Well, tourism has gone up since last year, so we're expecting 1 or 2% higher market value now. Okay, we got to extrapolate a little bit. And, well, this house is a little bit nicer than that one. Okay, we can extrapolate a little bit, but the numbers should be very close. They're not going to be wildly different. And until that's what we're doing, we should never say we got a good deal, didn't get a good deal, right? Someone may have gifted us a place. That's nice. It's not exactly a good deal. It's just a great situation, right? If we paid way less and it was very affordable for us and it worked out for us and it's the place we want to live in and we don't care about whether or not we get a good deal, then say a great situation arose and it was totally worth it for me. Fine. That's great. I know people who have said, I will pay double what this house is worth because I want it and I don't care about anything and I'm never going to try to sell it, which is very, very foolish, right? Everybody who says that, I find, wants to sell very quickly. So that mentality is exactly what tends to lead to people wanting to leave, right? The act of not getting a good deal, the beginning of that I'm being very emotional has a tendency to be the same people who, the more sure you are you're going to stay, in most cases, directly equates to being ready to leave really quickly. Right? I know that sounds odd, but that's a real thing that we find. I'm going to talk about that in another video. I think that's a good idea. But the more, in my experience, that someone is determined that they're going to jump in both feet forward, this is 100% sure this is the right thing for them. They're not going to hedge. They're not going to protect. They're not going to test. They're not going to verify. That's who ends up, that extreme degree of certainty that leads to using it as an excuse to not follow the rules of getting things right as an expat, is exactly what leads people to a situation where they are unhappy. And they find, of course, once you start down that path, you're probably going to continue down that path. Once you're emotional and you're making excuses for really dangerous decision-making, dangerous financial, it's going to probably continue. When do you stop and say, wait a minute, okay, we've been insane. We've been just throwing money away. Our logic for things was completely fake. Let's stop lying to ourselves. Let's start actually evaluating our money and spending it like rational people. Well, that's the thing you have to do. But when is someone going to do that? Once you started excusing that with big things like houses and cars, when's it going to kick in for something else? It's not very likely to. It might get lucky. You might be able to step back and say, oh, what have I done? I have to change my ways. And that'd be great. Hopefully this video is a trigger, but chances are it's not going to be. So it's a dangerous thing to start. You don't want to say, it's kind of like drugs, right? You don't want to sample them and be like, I think I'll probably be No. Addiction is addiction. Once you break that logic, it is likely to be something that is broken for you. So best to avoid it. It will help you. So this is a logic thing that I think people really need to focus on. Because when you're moving, there's so many emotions going on. When you're becoming an expat or becoming an immigrant, maybe it's emotions because you're afraid and you're leaving your previous country because you're afraid there. Maybe you have amazing new opportunities in the new country, hopefully. Maybe it's just you like moving and this is an exciting thing, or you just want some adventure. Whatever it is, tends to be very emotional. And that's a high-risk scenario, and that's one of the things that leads to so many bad expat decisions when they first are moving to a country. So we want to help you avoid that, and recognizing when your brain starts to go into the, I know I've done something wrong, but it's too late, so I want to justify to myself that I've done these things. Learning to recognize when your brain is doing that to itself is a big piece in protecting you from that. And knowing that when you become an expat, you're going to be very emotional, and to watch out for these things from the very beginning will help you a lot as well. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ScottAllenMiller. As always, thumbs up, watch another video, share on social media, do all those things, and I will see all of you tomorrow.